Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for being with us today. Before we get started, I wanted to express my sincere appreciation to Convergence for having us in Paris today to discuss the key role of partnerships for climate action. Welcome also to those of you who are joining us online from around the world. We love the fact that you're here, and we look forward to hearing from you very soon, so stay tuned. I'm the Director of Partnerships at UNOPS. UNOPS is the United Nations Office for Project Services. Many of you might not know us. We're a UN agency that specializes in infrastructure, procurement, and project services. We operate in the world's most fragile context. We are present in 80 countries around the world, and we execute projects on behalf of our partners. Climate action is one of our top priorities because climate change is happening now, and it's affecting every region around the world. We don't really need to go back to talking about the recent extreme heat waves, the devastating wildfires, and the floods. These are tragic reminders that we need to drastically scale up climate action if we want the SDGs and the Paris Agreement to be reached. Today, we want to discuss the key role of multilateral partnerships to do just that. Because as we all know, when you try to do something alone, it's really difficult. When you do it together, you have more chances to succeed. So we're going to have two 45-minute conversations. The first one, with the panelists that I have here today, we're going to discuss the consequences of climate change, the key role of youth inclusion, and the cooperation between the public and the private sector, with Nadia, Joe, and Atlee. I'm sorry to inform you that Kamal, who was our other speaker, was not able to make it today because of a last-minute impediment. Then, during the second 45-minute session, we're going to discuss an innovative multi-stakeholder partnership funded by AFD, l'Agence Française de Développement, in Southeast Asia to support the transition to renewable energy. And we're going to do that with Manel, Sirpa, Tegu, and Hana, who are right here, who I will invite during the second session of today's panel. So first, let me introduce you who's with me here this afternoon. Nadia, we'll start with women. You are the youth delegate to the UN for Climate and Environment, representing the government of Denmark. And you're also the EU youth representative at the UN. You represent the Danish government at events like COP27, and it's great to have you with us today. We also have Joe next to me. Joe is a solar engineer with over 20 years of experience in solar and renewable energy. He is the co-founder of Energy City, a provider of electricity via solar microgrids in West Africa. Thank you for being here today. And Atlee. Atlee is the head of the Secretariat of the Platform on Disaster Displacement, which is actually an organization hosted by UNOPS. Your organization builds bridges between policymakers, practitioners, and researchers to better prevent and respond to situations when people are forced to find refuge. So Atlee, I'll start with you. Climate disasters create very complex humanitarian and development challenges. Every year, millions of people are forced to leave their homes in the context of disasters, such as floods, tropical storms, and earthquakes. This calls for stronger coordination between different actors to better prevent and prepare for displacement. How can we connect the dots and facilitate coordinated actions across different sectors?
Thank you so much, Emily, and also to the organizers for inviting us to this great panel. So we are not an organization, and maybe that's a point I want to make. We are a platform, and we really recognize that the way we are working in order to avert, minimize, and address displacement requires working across different entities. So being a platform allows us to bring in that element of partnership. So that was maybe a little cheeky comment, but it was important for the purpose of what we are talking about today. So just a little background. we do know that with the adverse effect of climate change, more people will be moving for different reasons. We have quite good science that the mobility of people will increase. And we will also see people being forced to move or displaced in this context. So that suggests we have a complex issue in front of us, because mobility of people can both be a solution. Let's think about people affected by sea level rise, maybe the solution to a sea level rise situation, or a situation of desertification linked to climate change. Maybe a solution will be to move people out of these areas. So we have to think about solutions. But we also know that people don't want to move. So it's also a challenge. So we have to think solution and challenges at the same time. Normally, when we talk about people displaced, whether it is in conflict situation or also in context of disaster and adverse effect of climate change, we have a tendency to say that some people will have to deal with the drivers. So the war in Ukraine, that needs a political solution. Let somebody else deal with the drivers, and then the humanitarian can deal with the consequences. So that's also a tendency that we tend to assign different responsibilities. And we tend to have a separation between the development side of the building and the humanitarian side of the building. And that doesn't really work in the context of people moving, in the context of disaster and adverse effect of climate change. You need to bring different strands together, and this is where partnership is such an important issue. Arguably, if you want to deal with the human mobility consequences of adverse effect of climate change, we have to look at that as a migration issue. It's a displacement and human rights protection issue. It's an issue that is clearly within the realm of human rights protection. It's an issue that we have to work from a disaster risk reduction angle, from climate change action, and also development. So that suggests we all have a stake, and the challenge is how do we bring these different strands together? We need to work across silos, as we very often do. And the problem, of course, is that governments are not normally set up to work like that. They have different line ministries. So you have people working on climate change that go to the conference of the parties, but those dealing with disaster risk reduction, they go to another conference, for example, the Global Platform on Disaster Risk Reduction. So governments are also set up with different line ministries and not always working across the silos and being able to address this comprehensively. And we have the same issue, and unfortunately with the United Nations, they have different specialized agencies dealing with different areas, mandated areas. So some deal with disaster risk reduction, other agencies with human rights, and other on migration. So again, the partnership issue is important. And I just want to say to Emily, that's why the Platform on Disaster Displacement are so happy to be hosted by UNOPS, because you sit in a place where you bridge, at least from a UN perspective, and allows us to work across these silos. Few points in how do we bring this together. It's clearly that within the United Nations there are challenges with how to strategically coordinate a robust response to this different aspect of the adverse effect of climate change. There is need for a renewed look at different mandates, and there needs to be more scaled up predictability when it comes to displacement and human mobility within the United Nations. There are specialized agencies such as the International Organization for Migration and the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, but they normally deal only with the consequence side. So we need maybe a revamped thinking about how to strategically approach these issues. The same with states. We have seen some good examples where states are assigning focal point responsibility or interministerial working groups. These issues need to be dealt with in such an intersectoral space with partnership. And maybe the mantra on that is both a whole of government approach as well as whole of society approach with civil society, researchers, and others. What we have found, and I'm coming to the end now, Emily, is regional organizations seem to be quite better adaptive to working on these cross-cutting issues. It seems like regional organizations are able to take up issues around disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and human mobility in the same kind of context. And that is promising. So regional organizations don't underestimate their potential. So the key word, partnership, if you're going to solve the growing challenges of people moving in the context of the adverse effect of climate change, if we're able to see that also as a solution to some of the development challenges, but while recognizing the challenges that people don't want to move, we really need to think along partnership and don't go back to siloed approach, thinking mandates or division of responsibilities. Clearly a task for all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Atle. As you said, partnership is a key word, and we really need to work together to break the silos. So, as I said earlier, we want also to hear from you, here in the room and online. So we'll share the microphone a bit later, but please don't hesitate to start dropping comments and questions in the chat that is next to the video. Now I'll turn to you, Nadia. The size of today's generation of young people is unprecedented. There are today 1.8 billion people aged between 10 and 24 years old in the world. Close to 90% of these young people live in developing countries. They're the ones who will have to endure the long-term consequences of climate change. And yet what we see is that very few of them are able to fully participate in society. And so for girls, the barriers are even greater. With your experience and being a youth delegate, how would you improve inclusion in governance processes to ensure that young people's voices are heard?
Thank you so much for the really broad question, and thank you so much for the opportunity of being here today. I'm truly honored by the opportunity. So, as we already talked about today, partnerships are crucial, and young people should also be seen as an important stakeholders and an important group that we need to form partnerships with. And when it comes to that, it's really important that we look into structured inclusion of youth. Far too often we see that young people are included in specific contexts, and then they would maybe participate in one conference or things like that, and then that would be it. But we need to ensure that there is programs like youth delegates programs, which I'm in myself, or Danish youth, not Danish youth councils, but youth councils all over the world. And I think that is really important because that enables more young people to be involved and also to come up with more concrete recommendations. And then a thing that is really important when the young people are there is to speak a common language. Far too often we see that UN organizations are really fond of far too complicated language. And as an example of that, abbreviations, it seems like you are in love with it. Like, VNR, SDGs, UN Ops, as example. I love your name, UN Ops, it's a great name, but it's just there's so many abbreviations where it's an unnecessary barrier for young people who are involved and thinks that sustainability is good. Okay, SDG, if you went to a random bar, not that I would do that, and ask people about all these abbreviations, I think that you would lose a lot of people, and I think that is, a shame because we need those people to be involved and to think that the UN is interesting and is there for them. And then I think that it's important that young people are not only invited to speak, even though we are really honored by the opportunity, then we also need to ensure that the young people are at the decision-making table. They need to have meetings with ministers. They need to have it regularly where it's not on a scene or things like that. It needs to be in a boring meeting room. And young people need to be there because then we can be part of the process and part of delivering solutions and not only good speeches. And then I think it's important that we as young people are being acknowledged as experts in our own life and also catalysts for action. Far too often young people are being seen as, a box to tick and then, they're there. But, we are experts, we are really engaged in the green transition and we should as a society leverage on that. Also just because we're so many people and we're, we as young people are the one who will be hit the hardest in the future because we're alive at that point. And then I think it's also really important that we break down all those barriers that are there for youth inclusion. And an example of that is the economic barrier. especially for youth in the global south. It's really, or it's expensive for everyone, but they do not always have the finance to go to conferences like COP27, the climate conference, and we need a more structured way of financing that and building the capacity for young people. So that would be my to-do list that we need to go through pretty soon because we are busy. And I'm looking very much forward to the discussion today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Nadia, and thank you for reminding us that, yes, you guys will be alive when some of us won't anymore. So I think, when you think of reality checks, that's an important one. So with Atle, we've talked about the importance of partnerships, right? And Nadia, you've given us examples of, or ideas of how we could do that with youth. Now, Joe, I want to talk to you a little bit about, the project that you have put forward. So Sierra Leone has one of the lowest electricity access rates in the world. Only 32% of Sierra Leoneans have access to electricity, which is well below the sub-Saharan average of, around 30. Your company has electrified 30 communities as part of the Rural Renewable Energy Project in Sierra Leone. What were the main challenges that you faced? Based on your experience, how can public actors, like everybody in the room here today, encourage the participation of the private sector to address climate change?
Thank you for the question, and thank you all for coming for this final session. So I know a lot of you probably want to go and get a drink. But yeah, so basically, just a little bit about the project. It was actually implemented by UNOPS in collaboration with the FCDO, was a funding organization, with the Ministry of Energy from Sierra Leone. They started this really great project in 2016 to electrify 94 communities via solar mini-grids. And in that implementation, UNOPS was going to build 50 of them and then bring in private partners to then own and operate and manage those projects so that they would be financially sustainable. Because often what happens is somebody puts in a solar PV system somewhere, they leave it there, a year later, the batteries have failed, things don't work. And so really having an actual business sense behind it and having the operational money that can continue to operate it for 20 years or 40 years or 100 years is really important. And so what they did was they built 50 projects, and then we took over. And I think having UNOPS working with the Ministry of Energy was really an important step in this process, because if it's us as a private operator coming in saying, we want to do this, there's a lot of skepticism, you're a private company. So it took a lot of hand-holding from UNOPS going, okay, this is our idea, we've got the funder, we've got this idea of how we can do it, and doing a lot of that legwork of talking to ministers, talking to the junior ministers, junior people on the ground, and this is how it's going to operate, this is how it's going to work. And interestingly, they started in 2016, and in 2017, we were actually awarded with 2 other companies for 3 lots of projects, the award for this project, so we were supposed to be taking over in 2018. But there was an election in 2018, and there was a party change. And normally with party changes, things get thrown out. Obviously the party's taking over, they've got to do a lot of work. The people in the Ministry of Energy, some of them were changing. And so I honestly, at some points, were like, oh, this is never going to happen. It's going to take another, we're going to have to go through this basically starting from scratch. But having UNOPS there and that partnership that they had built, they were actually able to keep the momentum going. And actually, the new people coming in didn't see this, oh, this is somebody else's, another party's project. This is actually Sierra Leone's project. And they were able to continue. And we've, now, it's been a lot of delays. There's been a lot of challenges, COVID, everything, possibly everything that could happen happened in the last couple of years. But we've actually finished the project, our last projects in this summer, actually. So.
Thank you, Joe. Nadia, because you represent the future, and you've now heard what Joe and Atle talked about, is there actually something that you'd like to ask them?
I have so many questions. I can give them a list, and then they can, send a 100-pager to me afterwards, answering, all the things that needs to be done. But before diving into the questions, I think one important perspective when it comes to representing is also acknowledging that it's really hard representing. I know that, I claim to represent Danish or even European youth as a delegate, but also being aware that, young people are so diverse and we as a group are really broad. I think that is an important perspective. So I won't be able to speak on behalf of all youth and all future generations. So with that less pressure on, I've been wondering, Joe, so with all the great works that you do with mini-grids and developing that, how do you ensure to include local communities in a meaningful way, and maybe especially young people from maybe less privileged backgrounds in local community? How can you, build their capacity and get them included in all of your good work?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I think the most, obviously the hardest part often is the actual community engagement, trying to explain this is what we're going to do. This is, we're going to build a solar mini grid. We're going to sell you the electricity. This is how it's going to work. And then you've always got to start there's always a formality to how you first approach the community, but also engaging the youth groups within that community is very important. Engaging all of the people. And I will, the thing that we really did and what we try to emphasize is we don't have a bunch of people in Europe or America working. We have all of our team is based in Sierra Leone. We have community managers who are they're very, very young. Sometimes I'm always surprised at how young they are, but they can go in these communities. They've lived, so many of them are either from nearby communities or have family in communities that are similar, so they understand the context, and they're really able to go in, have these community meetings, and actually explain our offering, do those types of things. And it's really about training those types of people to be able to do those. And often it's really, especially our younger, they'll go out door to door, how come you didn't pay for electricity this week? What happened? What can I do? And it's having that really, the local people working to really build up the company itself is really.
Atle, I said Nadia represents the future, but you're also building for the future, right? Your platform is really about how do we better prepare ourselves. And when you talk about partnerships, do you have partnerships with youth associations?
I have to be careful. We are a policy outfit, and maybe this is a bad excuse, but we do work at multilateral level, and we work primarily with governments and international organizations. But I want to say, so we don't have really a formalized relationship with youth groups. I'm a member of something called a task force on displacement under the Framework Convention on Climate Change, on loss and damage, and there is a youth representative in that task force. So in that sense, we do try to engage in spaces where we have multi-stakeholder participation. But I've already discussed with Nadia that when we go to the next conference of the parties, we shall exchange, and maybe we could do some joint advocacy together and rally around some of key messages in a side event or another. So maybe look forward on some more formalized work on that aspect.
Oh, well, that's good to hear. I have one last question, and then maybe after we'll open it to the floor. And Nadia, Atle, you're probably going to be at COP27, both of you. And so different stakeholders from all regions are currently preparing their messages and their engagement. And what are the messages that you are taking there?
Thank you. I think I tried to make a point around we need to have integrated approach to any issues. So when we go to the Conference of Parties, one key message we try to convey is that don't forget to think about the more adverse effect of climate change and how do we deal with those consequences, such as displacement. And if you think about what can then happen under the convention, because there are certain things the convention and the work under the convention can do better than other areas of work. You can think about a migration conference. So at the level of key messages is that one thing is that what we see happening with adverse effect of climate change, and there's something called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, tells us that we are reaching the limitation of adaptation in certain places. The effect is so dire that we may not even be able to adapt anymore. So we have to accept that there will be loss and damages, including displacement. So in that context, one key message, we have to combat climate change. We have to mitigate, we have to reduce greenhouse gas emission. Because probably the single most important thing we can do to prevent more of this in the future is that we reach the temperature goal. It's terrifying to think that we will fail on the 1.5 degree. It's even more terrifying that we will fail on the 2 degree, and then we will see adverse effect of climate change, particularly in vulnerable countries, vulnerable communities, and we can just imagine some of the small island developing states, how they will fare in this. And the second message is that we're already into territory there are impact of climate change, so we need to scale up our efforts to adapt. We need to adapt. And one message we try to convey is also look at mobility as an adaptation possibility. So by moving people or supporting people to move or migrate, maybe that can have adaptive dividends. Maybe that can help people to build resilience, have another income, or strengthen their resilience back home. So think about mobility as an adaptation opportunity. And last and thirdly, which is the more sad part of the story, is that issue of loss and damage, and we're already into that territory. So one key message from us is we have to take loss and damage seriously, we have to better understand what's happening, and we have to dramatically increase our capacity and financing to avert, minimize, and address loss and damage. It's already happening, and it will probably increase if we are not able to reduce greenhouse gas emission. But that is, again, one of the single most important things we can do today. We have to combat climate change.
How about you, Nadia? What are you bringing?
Yeah, so I really love how a day in Paris can enable us to, agree on collaborating on an event at COP. I think that is truly amazing, and I think that also underlines one of my focus areas is really getting people to meet who wouldn't normally meet, because then you start to foster new ideas that, expand to partnerships that are structured and looks into the future. So that is really a perspective that I have, and that is something that I'll work with by, hosting side events and inviting people where, they would maybe be like, who's that one? And getting them to talk. I think that would, really foster creative and new innovative discussions. And then to, the thematics, themes, and priorities that I would have, then delivering on the finance is something that is really important for us as youth delegates. So Richest Countries has promised $100 billion to developing countries, and I think that is, that is insane. That is, of course, really positive that they have promised that, but the bad thing about a promise is when it's not, being delivered, and that is what we see. And I think that is really one of the things where, this panel really, comes into a higher perspective is, we need to finance loss and damages, we need to finance adaptation, and we also need to finance mitigation of climate change and building solar mini-grids and all those cool things. And to actually do that all over the world, we need money, and that is really gonna be one of my priorities, is gonna, say to European countries, like, you need to pay. So yeah, that would be one of my focus areas. And then a last focus area that I will have is really that we need to think more about combining biodiversity with climate crisis, because far too often we think about problems, one at a time. And the fact is that we are so busy when it comes to solving the climate challenge and the biodiversity challenge that we can't just say, okay, now we are having a climate summit and then we will have a biodiversity summit afterwards. We need to think about synergies and solving both crises at the same time. So that would also be one of my focus areas.
Thank you. Thank you both for sharing that. I want to open the floor for questions from the audience, but before I do that, is there any question that you would like to ask each other? Because when you're on a panel, you meet really interesting people, but you never get a chance to ask questions.
I think I had a question that's kind of for both of you, but you talked about partnerships at the regional level and getting people, and I've seen some of these regional meetings, and the one thing, it's like there's never any youth there. It's always, and is there a way that this can be fostered, or this regional level coordination, where it still is rolling up maybe to COP27 or wherever, but still kind of, how would you see those regional, I guess, especially with the humanitarian and the development, either one of you?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we do as young people in Denmark is that we are having both local youth climate councils and regional youth climate councils. And I think that that is really some of our strength, and that is really what enables me to go to Paris and speak here, is that I know that, okay, I'll go out to these local youth climate councils where they are, you know, giving feedback to municipalities, and that is a way of having, you know, structured engagement and structured partnerships for young people. And I think that that is something that is really crucial and that we need to develop all over the world. That would be a short answer.
Yes? Okay. Well, listen, we have a few minutes, and so I'm wondering if anybody in the room has a question. I'd be happy to hand you the mic. Is there any? Yes, please. If you can please introduce yourself and your name and your organization.
Okay. Hello, I'm Maya and I'm a student. Thank you so much for being here today. I have a question for you, Nadia. So you talked about the fact that young people are experts of their own lives, and I agree with you, but I think that many young people don't actually see themselves as experts. They see politicians and scientific people talking at councils, and they're like, what do I know? So what are your thoughts on that?
Thank you so much for the really good question. And I think that we have a lot of issues with that, and especially young women don't believe in themselves. And I think that there is a big thing for us as a society, and really keep telling young people that you are expert and that you know so much things, so that young people can, you know, actually start believing in themselves. And then I think another really important perspective is having role models in society, and not only having old policy makers, but also having, you know, young role models. One of my friends got elected as the youngest person for the European Parliament, and like she was 23 and got into Parliament, and I'm so proud of her, because now she's, you know, showing every young woman all over Europe that that is actually possible, and that young people can be in Parliament. And I think that, you know, that is so important. And then that is like the bigger perspective, and, you know, who we should vote for. And not only young women, but also young women and men, of course. But then I think it's also a really, you know, local thing. I think that it's really important for me as a friend to say to you know, all of my friend groups that, hey, you know, you're good, and really encouraging each other to dare to speak up, because if I haven't had those friends, I wouldn't be here today.
Good. I don't know if we have any questions online. Since I don't see any, is there anyone else in the room? Yes, I see somebody in the back over there.
Yes, thank you to the panelists. My name is Leah. I'm an independent translator, but I worked in the sector for a while, and I heard a lot of you talking about the siloed nature of the environment that we work in, and I was wondering if any of you have any concrete suggestions for how to break down these silos on the issues, on the expertise, even the ages that are implicated.
Who wants to start? That's the big question. How do we break silos?
No, I think we tend to say we work, you know, in silos, and then we don't really have clever ideas about how to deal with it. I think, let me just throw in a few. I think we have a legacy of thinking the old way. So we are coming out of the last century. We think, you know, A or B or up and down, and that everything was binary. So we left, for example, on human mobility challenge, we left, you know, with the notion that there are migrants on one side and there are refugees on the other, and that was the entire reality. But then we dig that and unpack it a little, and then we see it's far more complex. And we also left with a system of governance where there are specialized line ministries or agencies dealing with different issues, and that needs to be raised at a higher level. And from a governance perspective, what we have seen sometimes is that if the prime minister or the president have a cabinet or something working group, then that allows a little or better integration. So you need to lift it, some of these cross-cutting. They're evidently cross-cutting. Climate change is cross-cutting. You can't say that this belongs to Ministry of Water or Ministry of Environment. You need to put it across. I think that is at the governance side. I think NGOs are far better equipped. They don't really think mandates. They don't really think institution. They think about needs or how to deal with. So I think maybe if you have less mandated focus, I think, and to be honest, I should be careful what I'm saying, but I think the United Nations is old-fashioned in the way it's set up with so many mandated agencies. It really needs to be bridged, and maybe we need less agencies that deals with, for example, these issues. So there must be a reform, I think, in the United Session. Thank you.
Joe?
Yeah, I would also say, I think one, it's, it's the agencies, it's also the people, right? Like, I'm an engineer, my co-founder or person who started the company, she was coming out of business school, she came out of finance, and she just saw the problems in one of the I forgot which country she actually saw that there's no light here. It didn't make sense to her. And her first question is, what can we do? And then she was working in the energy sector in the US, had this crazy idea, oh yeah, maybe we can do these solar mini grids in West Africa. We started talking, and it was just, and I think that, especially there's so often you see this like, this is the way things are done. This is just the way things are done. This is just the way things are done. It's especially whether it's biodiversity or whatever, all of these types of problems. And it's really like getting people to ask the questions, like maybe there's a better way, can we try something? And then actually just getting out. And sometimes you have to just do the work, put in the project, see if it works, fail sometimes, but then also keep, pick yourself back up and then keep going.
Thank you, Nadia.
Yeah, so I think one important thing that we need to realize to, think more across different themes is really stop the SDG picking, to use an abbreviation. But far too often I see companies or organizations, pick their favorite sustainable development goals, and that is one of the things that really annoys me when, you are at a conference, someone asks you to pick an SDG, and then they will take a picture, and that doesn't make sense, because it's not sustainability if I pick sustainable energy and that don't care about life in on land or life in water. So I think not doing that is a really important perspective, and that is also something we should call out companies for doing when they are having their yearly report, and then they're saying, we're delivering on sustainable energy and industry and other SDGs that they have selected, and then they don't, gender equality and those things. They need to report on all SDGs and then be honest and say, okay, we're not delivering on, the biodiversity SDGs, but at least report on it and do not select your favorite ones. I think that is really important. And then another thing is also, updating our policies. And I think that it's really, important what you're saying, that, we shouldn't have ministries where, they would only, so we would have these ministry and they would be the one, caring about climate and biodiversity. All ministries need to think about it. And that also means that all ministry almost would need to revisit their policies. When you have the energy ministry, they need to look into the tender processes they have for, selecting who wins an energy project. Can you, update them so that you would maybe have companies competing on, biodiversity or competing on local job creations or sustainability more general. I think that would be really interesting, and I know that it's a big task, but the problem is big, so better go big.
Yeah, no, that's a really good perspective. We have time for one more. I don't know online or in the room if anybody has one. Yes, please.
Contribution.
Yeah.
Pour mademoiselle. Voilà, moi je... Merci.
Juste 2 petites minutes. Il s'installe et puis vous allez.
Oui, pas de souci.
We are using every languages here, and unfortunately will be English. Can you hear the interpreter? Can you hear the interpreter? So I had a comment for Nadia. I think it's great, this momentum we can see in Europe. I come from Africa, and for young people who wish to be engaged, who wish to be involved, even though they have tried to be part of organizations like Youngo or Agenda 2030, we are seeing that there is a lot going on. Last month, I was with young people, and in Africa, they are trying to prepare for the COP27 for the region of Africa. And the first issue is that everything is happening in English, whereas there are a lot of French speakers in France. There is also an issue with transfer of skills. So I'm in a difficult position because I have to raise awareness when it comes to climate issues, because young people are not informed and they are not in a position to understand what's happening in meetings with young Europeans. I was in Côte d'Ivoire, and it was impossible for them to have access to CFA francs to organize a consultation before making the voice of young Africans heard before the regional conference. So I was very much surprised, because the young people I support as a volunteer are all part of UN organizations, Agenda 2030, but they feel left behind, they feel alone. So since you are here, since you are saying that there are different spaces for consultation in Europe, so here I'm the advocate of young Africans. How can young Europeans transfer those skills to young Africans? How can you help them organize a consultation process? How can they be heard publicly? And then at the UN, even though the states do not acknowledge the voice of young people, the UN that are present in our countries need to carry that out. Often in meetings that we have in our countries at the level of the UN, I have worked a lot with UNICEF, for instance, young people are not there. So this is another advocacy process that we need to focus on, because we need to make young people's voice heard. Even though our governments do not acknowledge them, the UN needs to be a sort of an ombudsman for young people. Thank you very much, Nadia.
Thank you so much for the good question. And I also mentioned it in the beginning, that it's so important to include young people from the Global South. And one of the things that I tried to highlight was really the importance of financing young people from the Global South, because they do not have governments that always prioritize it. And I think that that is really something that should be the UN's focus. They should have like established program that is financed, and where there is organizers who are there to help young people from the Global South, including Africa, to build on their capacities and to be engaged. I think that is really important, and I think that is what is needed. That being said, I will not only put all the responsibility on the UN. I think we, as young people who are involved, we have a lot of responsibility as well. And one of the things I have done myself was at some point I was invited to a high-level event that was about the green transition also in Africa. And I remember, thinking that it was kind of strange that, I was the only youth representative. And as I talked about earlier today, I'm not going to be, representing all youth, and especially not young people from Africa and the Global South. So therefore, I actually told, the organizers of that high-level event that, I'm honored of being here, but, you should also invite this guy. And then there was a whole democratic process of electing a guy from Nigeria, and his name is Ogbonna, and he actually went to the high-level event, and it was during COVID, so it was free for him to tap in online. But that is an example of how we, as young people who are privileged enough to be there, can actually also make a change of involving more young people. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Yeah, I would like to add one thing too. The visa system, it has to be fixed. If I wanted to fly somebody for a technical conference, there's next week a conference on mini grids in London. Even if I wanted to fly my engineer who's got a Sierra Leone passport or a Beninese passport, there's no way we can get that visa. We won't. I'm not saying we won't try. It's like there's not enough time when the conferences are announced. There's not enough, all of these things, and I think conferences themselves have to also start thinking about this. It would be great that more people, because there's a lot of companies now in Africa who are doing great work that would probably fly their people to conferences here maybe, or at some point don't have a conference on African energy in Denmark or whatever. Sorry to pick on Denmark.
Yeah.
But maybe start putting it in West Africa where more people can go to it.
I know, such important points. I think we talked about partnerships, but talking about removing barriers is also extremely important. So I'd like to thank you very much for this inspiring conversation. I think that some of the key points to address the climate crisis have been underlined. We've just touched the surface. But I think clearly both youth inclusion and stronger international cooperation must be part of all the conversations. The climate crisis is a reality that we need to increase financing for climate action. On the way to COP27, joint efforts of public and private actors together with civil society will be key. We've said that many times, for all the COP preparations. Hopefully, this year and this time we are more successful. I would like now to invite our second set of speakers on stage. But first, before we do that, can I have a really big round of applause for our first speakers? Thank you. Thank you very much. And if you're staying here and if you're watching us at home, we're going to continue the conversation in a few minutes with a very successful example of a multi-stakeholder partnership, the Southeast Energy Transition Partnership. And for that, let's watch a video to learn more about the program, and we'll get set up with our new panelists.
To clean and affordable energy, the road to net zero carbon emissions by 2050 would be faster. But that's not the case. Global energy consumption continues to rise. More than 80% of our energy still comes from fossil fuel, accounting for more than 2/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. Countries all over the world must limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius to reach safe levels by 2050. One of the most vulnerable regions to climate change is Southeast Asia. Its impressive economic growth has led to an increase in natural disasters worsened by climate change, persistent environmental pollution, local health risks, and increased hazardous emissions. The share of clean energy is increasing in this region, but unfortunately, the progress is not fast enough. That's why our work at the Southeast Asia Energy Transition Partnership, or ETP, is crucial. ETP, under the United Nations Office for Project Services, is a multi-stakeholder partnership that aims to accelerate energy transition in Southeast Asia and help meet the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris climate targets for mitigating climate change. ETP brings together governments, the private sector, and civil society to facilitate rapid energy transition in Southeast Asia. We are initially focused on Indonesia, the Philippines, and Vietnam. They have the highest energy demand, high levels of dependency on fossil fuels, a substantial pipeline for fossil fuel-based projects, and a significant renewable energy and energy efficiency potential. So how does ETP help Southeast Asia ramp up its energy transition? The answer is by focusing on 4 strategic areas. 1. Improve renewable energy and energy efficiency policies, regulations, and laws, and cultivate a policy-enabled environment by enhancing the planning and implementing capabilities of various institutions. 2. Enhance investment environment that is attractive for public and private renewable energy and energy efficiency projects. 3. Improve infrastructure, digital technologies, and investment in modern transmission and distribution networks to extend smart grids. 4. Increase the awareness and knowledge of different stakeholders involved in the renewable energy and energy efficiency value chains. Importantly, we aim for a just and equitable energy transition. As we move away from fossil fuels, we need to ensure communities that are economically dependent on coal are not left behind, and are empowered to engage and benefit with the new green economy. ETP aims to implement these strategies by 2025. By 2030, we would have achieved the following results: robust renewable energy and energy efficiency policies, and an enabling environment. Increased flow of public and private investments into renewable energy and energy efficiency projects. More renewable energy supply integrated in smart grids. And enhanced access to renewable energy and energy efficiency knowledge. With all stakeholders working closely together, we could see Southeast Asia move to a net zero carbon emitting energy systems by 2050 or earlier, to ensure environmental sustainability, economic growth, and energy security, for a cleaner, brighter, and healthier world for our future generations.
Good. Well, listen, we said we were going to be changing gears, and that's what we're doing. So we're going to talk about a successful partnership when it comes to climate action. I have 4 new panelists with me. Let me quickly introduce them, and then we'll jump into the conversation. So first, I have Manel from the Agence Française de Développement, which is one of the key funding partners supporting the Energy Transition Partnership. You are the deputy head of the Energy Division, and you also chair the steering committee of this program. Thank you for being with us today. Then we have Sirpa. Sirpa is the director of the Southeast Asia Energy Transition Partnership, and I'm going to start saying ETP if you don't mind, because it's a long name, and so we'll say ETP, which is hosted by UNOPS. You oversee the work that the group does across the Philippines, Indonesia, and Vietnam. Welcome today. We also have Hannah, who is the executive director of RED 21, a multi-stakeholder policy network that is based here in Paris. You specialize in renewable energy, and we could describe your group as a community catalyst or incubator that drives conversation on the transition to renewable energy and energy efficiency. Welcome, and thank you for being here. And last, Pak Teguh. It's rare that we have 4 women, 1 man. And you are the executive vice president of PLN, an Indonesian government-owned corporation distributing and generating electricity. Thank you very much for being with us today. So let's start the conversation. I'll start with you, Manel. You chair the steering committee of the Energy Transition Partnership. What is the underlying rationale that brings private and public partners together in this partnership?
Yes. Is it working? Yes. Thank you very much for the question and for giving me the floor to start the discussion. Well, you know, Southeast Asia region, we are all aware here that the region is facing key challenges to engage into a low carbon pathway. And government, as decision makers, will have to undertake sound policy planning and engage into strong political action. But engaging the region towards low carbon pathways will also need all kinds of stakeholders' involvement from all parts. And it will require collaborating with civil society, with the private sector, including philanthropies. And this is essential in order to achieve energy transition. For public donors such as AFD, partnering with philanthropies and the private sector is critical. And this key role of philanthropies was emphasized at the occasion of the 2017 One Planet Summit through the launch of Philanthropists Task Force. And this is where the genesis of the Energy Transition Partnership was. And so step by step through our discussions, and in the previous discussion we valued this, what happens in these kinds of conferences. We meet people we don't know, and it helps us get out of our silo. So it was the start of this adventure, and 5 years after, we're standing here with Sirpa, and we can only recognize how ETP was able to showcase the value of bringing together governments and philanthropies. This collaboration led to combining not only various sources of funding, but also various modalities of intervention. And this is where I see the key success. It combines public donors who are more used to, I would say, the policy dialogue, high-level discussions with governments, long-term views and planning, with philanthropies who are, I would say, maybe more pragmatic, on the ground. It's a bit caricatural, but it doesn't happen this way, of course, but it's the DNA of each word is driven by this perspective. And we were able, through ETP, to join forces and not only discuss about the issues, but try to find solutions and engage into policy dialogue with governments, with public utilities, and we have a representative here, and identify key areas for collaboration and bring funding. So this partnership also was able to showcase some pilot interventions and programs, and then through these successful piloting initiatives, we were able to bring them to highest levels of policy dialogue. So this, I would say, we are liaising with both governments and public utilities, and showing to the private sector and philanthropies that there is value in bringing them into this specific space. So ETP, I think we'll have a discussion, was very successful in doing so, and we're very happy that we joined the initiative very early.
Oh, good, thank you. And as we saw from the video, it is very successful, right? In the first panel, we talked about the importance of creating these partnerships, and now we have one with a very interesting model. So now, Sirpa, I turn to you. The energy demand in Southeast Asia is expected to double by 2035. And so the challenges are enormous, and we'd love to hear more about some of these challenges and what you're going to do in addressing the energy transition in the region. How is the ETP best placed to support the shift to renewable energy in that important region?
Great, thank you, Emily. Let me just step back a little bit to give the room a picture of what we are really talking about. So the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, issued a global roadmap for a massive transformation toward the net zero emissions by 2050 in support of the Paris climate goals. This roadmap calls for no new coal. It calls for phasing down of current coal-fired power capacity in all countries by 2040, as well as significant increases in funding for renewables and energy efficiency. So the agenda is a challenge. Now, coming back to Emily, your question regarding the increased demand for energy, and the increase in energy demand has been really galloping in Southeast Asia ever since the 90s. And now this growth has returned after the post-pandemic period. But what the way we look at it at the ETP is that it's really an opportunity. It's an opportunity to bring in the renewables to meet the demand. And because these countries also have ample renewable energy resources, it's such an excellent chance at implementing renewable energy while these countries at the same time take steps to bring their coal-fired power plant fleet down and close those, especially the more polluting plants. So this is one. It's a great opportunity. The second point that I would make regarding that is that this transformation is a huge challenge, but there are solutions. So while energy efficiency in the region is very low, there are clearly programs that we can implement to improve the energy intensity of the economies, to reduce the energy intensity of the economies there. And ETP is on it. So we are working with our partners to unlock finance for energy efficiency investments, for instance. Another issue that makes energy transition a huge challenge is that fossil fuels are heavily subsidized. These subsidies are starting to cost dramatically for all the governments in the region. And again, there are solutions to bring down the subsidies gradually so that at the same time we'll see renewable energy being invested in, the emissions being brought down, and without exacerbating impacts on the most vulnerable. So there are solutions. We are working on those solutions with ETP's Secretariat, ETP's implementing partners, and other alliances in the region. The aging grids require mega projects, mega investments in order to bring them to a standard where they can integrate variable renewable energy into consumption. So ETP is working toward alliances that can finance these investment plans. And another challenge is that we need to build leadership and championship in the region so that the national champions can take ownership and a role in ensuring that the investment is actually brought into the renewable energy and energy efficiency. And people-centered energy transition also calls for the involvement of civil society. And I will add here the youth, since we have really been very impressed by the role of that the youth needs to play in this energy transition program. So ETP works together with the World Bank here, for instance, on aiming to develop a forum where civil society leaders and communities can meet with donors to develop programs for their transitional needs. So if my first point is that the growth in energy demand is an opportunity, my second point is that there are challenges, but there are also solutions, and ETP is part of that solution. Then my third point is that we need partnerships. And ETP is one unique partnership that works with everyone that has an aligned interest in energy transition. And we particularly value our members, and we invite always more members into our membership. We value this membership because we see each member bringing in their own networks and their own solutions and innovations into this forum that we can then support our recipient governments and recipient country level stakeholders identify solutions. So it's critical that we have very active shareholding in our membership. We also build alliances with national expertise, so we always make sure that our strategic communications are nationally driven. So it's far more easy for the solutions to be adopted when they are calibrated to the local conditions. It's actually more or less not possible if they are not calibrated to the local conditions. So we put a lot of value in ensuring that we fully understand what the implications are and how these processes and these new changes and transformations can be implemented. So maybe I leave you with that, that in order for us to do good on Secretary General's objectives and tall order goals, partnerships like ETP are required to capitalize on the global alliances as well as to bring forth the national expertise we have in each of our countries. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Sirpa. Thank you for sharing more with us. And so we've talked about how the ETP was and is a successful partnership. Now let's really test that with a beneficiary of that, right? Because it's one thing for us to say it. I'm now turning to you, Teguh. Indonesia is close to reaching total electrification. Back in 1990, the electrification rate was at 62%, so it's a very impressive development. However, we all know that Indonesia is still heavily dependent on fossil fuels. PLN is a beneficiary of the Energy Transition Partnership. Can you tell us a few words on how you benefit from this multi-stakeholder partnership?
Okay, thank you. So, please allow me to thanking this opportunity to speak at this prominent event to showcase the importance of partnership between PLN and UNOPS to combat climate change by upgrading Java Bali main control center. Then, why this partnership is so important? Yeah, to PLN. Yeah, just a bit background. Yeah, as you mentioned, 10 years ago, the penetration ratio is below 70%, and currently 99.4%. Yeah, so it's very huge and impressive progress. And second, dealing with PLN is the state electricity company in Indonesia, and then serving 84.5 million customers as of June 2022, or 275 million population. Then having partnership with ETP is really providing, and we can enjoy the benefit of having partnership. First thing first is we can enjoy efficient procurement system. By only 3 months, we can have the best winner yeah, service provider, yeah, the international consultant that currently working with us to develop, design, and later on, and the step 2, supervising the construction of this main control center. Second is because UNOPS, under the ETP program, has UN fiduciary or trustable platform. So they can bring best service provider around the world to following the international competitive bidding. Because UNOPS is really widely known and already have long-term experience to provide and also to bid the best consultant available around the world. And then last but not least is comprehensive, reliable, and also responsible team that's serving us, working with us, together with us, assisting and providing assistance to us to develop the TOR and then dealing with the procurement process and dynamic challenge that always happening during the execution of the program. And we really enjoy their expertise and their long-term experience in many fields of their expertise. So we can have a very efficient procurement process and with the best provider of service available around the world that we currently enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing the experience with us. Hannah, now I turn to you because we've talked, about fossil fuel and the challenge that Indonesia is facing. So in the past few years, we've seen an unprecedented momentum for leaving the fossil fuel age behind us. On the way to COP27, what should governments do to ensure equitable governance for both global North and global South countries? Because that's a challenge, right?
Yes, I think it is a challenge. I would, however, like to step back again and say, yes, we have seen an unprecedented momentum, as we heard. I mean, I think we have very strong messages that the transition needs to happen. We don't have another choice. We have limited time. And I'll do what Rantanan is good at doing, is using some data. 80% of the energy we consume is still building on fossil fuel today. And this was the same 30 years ago. And since there is an increasing energy demand, and I think this is exactly why the region of Southeast Asia is so important to look at, this means that we are consuming more fossil fuel today than ever. I'm not questioning at all the ambition, but I think we heard in the panel before, we heard it now, that the solutions need to happen. Solutions are there, implementation is required, and this means mobilization of funding. So we need to be very honest about the fact that even though the ambition is there, the way to go there is really, really still very long. Now, what to bring to COP, I think, is the level of urgency and exactly those honest discussions and the honest voices asking for the implementation, asking for making the ambition not only an ambition and a promise we might not stick to, but a reality. And I think something to bring to COP here, we heard about the systems approach. I think the partnerships are really important here. Climate change is basically societal. It's a societal problem, and we need a societal answer. And this is the same when we're looking at energy and the transition to an efficient and renewable energy-based system. It's not only a transition of a technological system, it is a transition of markets. It's a transition of our economy. It's a transition of our governance in the political systems. Let's be honest. I mean, I think the Ukraine situation shows exactly what I'm referring to. It's a security issue. And it's a transition of the society. So we're speaking about new perspectives for young people. We're speaking about jobs. We're speaking about transitioning from coal away to renewable energy. It is not black and white, but there is a diversity of players and messages we need to bring there. And I think this is exactly what we see from Rantanan's side, that we need to stop speaking about energy as something which is abstract. I mean, let's be honest, who in the room here knows where the kilowatt, what a kilowatt is and a kilowatt hour, and where the energy comes from, etc. But we are speaking about very concrete things. It means like mobility, moving from point 1 to point 2. It means telecommunication, it means cooling, it means heating. And when we are thinking about those supply parts, you see, the supply chain that are here, the solution and the comfort it brings. And when we're looking at Southeast Asia, we're speaking about the reality that still, or in Africa, we're here speaking about the fact that there is still many players, many people in the world that do not even have access to energy, you see. Here it is about development question, it's about economic opportunities. And I think something to bring to COP here, and voices to bring to COP, is actually the fact to to humanize the energy transition. From Rent on one side, as a global network, and I think this is why we're working also closely with ETP or regional partners, national partners, the reality is we're working at the global story and what is needed, but to inspire. And this is what we need. Today we need inspiration. We need to think about what society do we want to have and what energy solutions do exist to reach the society. And to be able to do this as a global player, we cannot just have global random statements of renewable energy is the least cost, renewable energy will create jobs, etc. But we need the concrete example of an electric utility like PLN, of a city that is moving to 100% renewable energy, of a company that is driving basically those parts, to show that there are benefits that are concrete and tangible, and that there is really an interest for players to engage here. And by doing this, we can also bring other voices, I think, to COP and activate other pressure points. Because if we don't do this and we stick as experts in the room, we're not getting there. I think I've just wrote down one thing. It's not only about the right answer. It's often also about the right question. It's not only about the right message, it's also often about the right messenger. And I think this is where COP, especially also as a COP hosted in Africa, in the current energy security situation, is really a fabulous opportunity to change some of the discussions we're having.
Thank you, Hannah. There are so many things that you said that I'd love to pick on, you know, how, as you said, it's a societal problem that requires a societal solution, right? And we have to humanize the transition. And so I'm sure that a lot of people in the room have questions, but before we do that, I was wondering if maybe some of you have questions to each other, right? Because when you're talking about the fact that, you know, this is a societal problem, what does a government entity think about that, right? And so I'd love to see if some of you would like to build on some of what you've said. Would you like to start, Manel? Yes?
Yeah, I can jump in and then it's interesting what we heard, and I can only echo what was said about energy transition being a societal I wouldn't say issue, but we need to tackle it collectively. I heard you talk about also implementation and recognize the fact that ETP was fast in implementing projects and that this is appreciated. So we need to be quick there because climate change is an issue of today, and we don't need to just make promises for the generations of the future who will be there when we'll not be there anymore.
Yeah, Nadia told us that in the first.
So, no, I wanted to ask you as a representative of and senior management of PLN, so you mentioned the successful experience with ETP, but what in your mind make ETP so different from other stakeholders? And there are so many funders, donors, public donors, private sector stakeholders. So why would you choose to work with ETP? Because at the end of the day, it's the beneficiary who chooses the source of funding and the partner. We're talking about partnerships. I think it's interesting to hear from you as an implementer of energy transition and decision maker, what would bring you to one donor specifically, and specifically ATP?
Yeah, thank you. Very good question. Yeah, so many people, donors coming to us. So it's a long history, yeah, to work with ETP. But what I can share is the background of knowing UNOPS is originally PLN proposing a loan to ADB, and then to develop electricity infrastructure, including to upgrade Java Bali main control center, which is currently almost obsolete. Then ADB introducing us to UNOPS. Before that, we have so many candidates. Then after very careful discussion with the top senior management, and then we finding out that there are some factors that allow us to choose UNOPS or under the ETP program to be in partnership with PLN. First thing first is, their expertise, yeah. And then second, we trust each other. We know each other. Yeah, because before that, we have a long discussion with ADB and also with ETP in this case, like SIRPA. And then PLN is trust UNOPS as a UN agency, yeah, that have a very long history of providing the service consultant, yeah, for the beneficiaries. And then second, UNOPS also trust PLN as the partner, yeah. So trust is very important in this case. To be honest, that multilateral, in this case like UNOPS, is what we call as fair broker. Yeah, you guys don't have any interest at all, because we also member of UN, right? So this building the very basic of collaboration or partnership, which is trust. And second is, we have shared common objectives. We, PLN, is, have the mandated program from the government to reduce the greenhouse gas emission. And UN, OPS in this case, also under ETP program, has the same, objectives. And then last but not least is UNOPS under ETP program has the dedicated team that always working towards solution. Yeah. So in the beginning of the program, we have discussed with them, and then we know the staff, procurement, and then legal and technical expertise as well. And we know that we are supporting by not only the best organization, but also the best team available under the ETP program. Yeah, we know Sirpa, we know her team available that working always with us. So this is no wonder. In the beginning of time, I didn't believe that they can work in 3 months. But after they can make it, they made it less than 3 months to complete the procurement process till the international consultant is being selected. That's really, for me, is really, even in PLN internally is really, we didn't believe in the beginning, but then less than 3 months, they made it. Yeah, that's really awesome. Thank you.
Well, Sirpa, you heard that it's awesome. So do you want to react to that? This is really good. Trust is important, and you delivered, right? And in partnerships, that's what matters.
Yeah, trust is very important, Emily. And that trust is, of course, not just associated with myself being there, but indeed, as Prateku said, the entire team is available to PLN to resolve problems. So we have a back office team that deals with procurement, we have people who deal with finance, payments, and of course our country level team that is constantly in dialogue with PLN, checking on if things are going well and whether there are any issues. And in fact, we are now discussing far broader program to develop some wind opportunities, solar, We're also looking at how can we help maybe some capacity building on corporate management. So we have a big program in mind. So we know that PLN is the key partner in the country. We are very, very happy to be there at the center stage of this important institution. But if you allow me, Emily, I would also like to say that we have similar programs in Vietnam and in the Philippines. And for instance, one of the exciting programs we did in Vietnam, which is experiencing a lot of energy transition challenges and very rapid growth demand in the energy sector. Last May, we were able to, again, quite rapidly bring in very high-level expertise to support preparation of a coal abatement scenario planning for their energy sector plan. They still also include quite a bit of new coal in their plan. And so this program really sat through the government echelons from the bottom to the top in various agencies, discussing hours and hours on the assumptions that the government had used to develop that plan, which involves coal, and came out with four very interesting scenarios by which they can reduce that coal in their planning. And indeed, we have been told that procurement, that abatement study contributed to Vietnam government's net zero emissions declaration at the last COP meeting in November 2021. Thanks.
Oh, good. Good to hear. Yes, Manel, please.
Just wanted to add something, because indeed I can hear trust, expertise, common objectives, and the ability to deliver. And I just wanted to bring the donor's perspective and government perspective, because what ETP is doing with the beneficiaries is it's also doing it with the contributors and the donor countries, because we are also discussing about the opportunities of arising from this support in terms of projects, at scale projects to finance. So ETP is supporting PLN for a wind study, but AFD is at the same time considering a wind project that will be delivered behind the wind study. So I think and this is what we're talking about when we say partnering. It's really bringing everybody on the table and reaching out to people and trying to link and to connect people amongst themselves.
Yeah, no, that's a very important point. As you said, you start with one, right? And then if it works, then you're willing to start more as a donor. Rana, do you want to jump on that? Because, as a catalyst and as somebody who convenes these types of conversations.
Yes, I would love to do so. I mean, as Rentenuan, we're working as we're multi-stakeholder community. So our members and community members, more than 4,000, is governments, industry, research academia, NGOs, and intergovernmental organizations. And I think the experience here, and I think this is also, I would really echo what you're saying, like it is about building trust by having those different types of players sitting around a table that sometimes, and in some of the countries you're operating in, do not have the culture and habit to sit around the table. So it is about creating the safe spaces where we can ask questions, where we can realize that maybe our entry points are different ones, but that the common ground, that there is often more common ground than only differences. So moving out of a very polarized and polarizing approach we might have in big room, because we need to be the institutional voice and we need to be the expert, because otherwise we might be attackable. We might have a political statement instead of really thinking what the reality is. Bringing this into a safe space and continuous dialogue to really be able to tackle the challenges, but also recognize solutions that are there. And I think this is really something where, as a global community, so our question here is very often, and I think when we spoke about this question about like African players or the Southeast Asian players, players who are not sitting around the table, how do we connect here? I feel weird today, and that's also learning from COVID. We can learn from exactly those partnerships at the national level, at a regional level, on what the mechanisms are to also create basically probably global spaces, online spaces, that can inspire this type of exchange, dialogue, and players around the table. To then dribble it down again into Sierra Leone, or I think you spoke about Côte d'Ivoire, for instance, and see what can we learn here. Obviously, the realities in the countries are different. The types of players is different. Our cultures are different. Governance is different. So there is a whole educational part. But there are some key success factors, I think, that are really, that we can learn basically here. And maybe just a last word, what is basically a link between a regional partnership and Rent21 as a global part? We obviously lack, I guess, like as a secretariat, all the insights you might have, or you certainly have on Indonesia, on all the countries we're working in. But what we can bring is actually voices and experiences from other regions, and sometimes also messages and messengers who can say things which maybe a civil society organization, I take the example of Indonesia, might not say in such an easy way, just because there is politics that are reality, there is governance that is reality, and to advance basically the discussions. So I think there is, if we think about what is the future of partnerships, I think the future is very much like, how do we bridge those partnerships, and how do we build on each other's strengths in a very strategic way?
Yeah, no, you're right in saying that, the messenger is as important as the message. And so we have a few minutes left, and I would like now to open it to our audience. If you want to ask a question, please raise your hand and tell us your name and your organization. If you're watching us online, just drop a comment next to the video, and our team will read it to us. I don't know if there is any question. Yes, please.
My name is Barbara. I'm working with the Scaling Up Nutrition Movement, which is another partnership hosted by UNOPS. And my question is around potential trade-offs that you have identified, because what I found really interesting in your dialogue was that we talked a lot about multi-stakeholder collaboration, but not enough, in my sense, around multi-sectoral collaboration. And Nadia made an excellent point earlier that we cannot, in the current context, just pick one SDG and think that this will move the whole system around. I mean, we're facing very complex issues, and you know very much that renewable energy is not the silver bullet, unfortunately, and there are trade-offs. So I'm wondering if there have been any efforts to identify those trade-offs, potentially mitigate them, and how you interacting with other sectors. Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to take that one first? Hannah and Tegu, and then Hannah.
Yeah, probably later the other panelists can add. So, yeah, thank you. Very good question. But probably I need to explain the background about the strategic level of Jawa Bali control. Why Jawa Bali control system? Because Jawa Bali is representing 70% of Indonesia electricity system. So why is that 70%? Because Indonesia is consisting of 64 gigawatt installed capacity. Then energy mix is currently 60% coming from fossil fuel. Yeah, or in other words, like, yeah, coal. Yeah. Then, by having main control center, which is already absorbing the newest technology, then it is really the key to introduce more variable renewable energy into Indonesia electricity system. So without having this MCC being upgrading, then we can say impossible. So the key is really upgrading first with the advanced control center, with the latest technology. And then we can absorb more renewable energy. We can absorb even, to evacuate more and absorb more, including from the rooftop solar panel. So without having this, then we can say this is difficult or impossible. So that's why having this partnership is really, the key. And then second, then Indonesia can execute the plan. The latest RVPTL telling us that from 10 years from now, the additional capacity, 51% from it, the new power plants, is coming from renewable energy. So if we only develop the renewable energy power plants without upgrading the control system, then we cannot absorb. We cannot execute the energy mix. So that's why this is really, I agree with you. We need to work together. Not only government, not only multilateral agency, not only philanthropic organization, but all of the people should working together in order to reduce the greenhouse gas emission of the, in one country, two countries, or the countries that already commit to it. So I really agree, and really, this need collaboration, this need partnership, and also the commitment from all of the parties, not only one single country and one single party. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Tegu. And I would love to be able to give the floor to others, but I'm getting signals that it's over, that our session is over. And so, listen, thank you so much to all the panelists for your insights. The Energy Transition Partnership is a clear example that global challenges need to be addressed together. I also want to thank Convergence for hosting this forum. Thank you also to the AFD and to all the donors supporting the Energy Transition Partnership. And so I want to thank our brilliant panelists. If you just want to give them a round of applause, thank you very much for being with us today.